So this is what we're making. An oval wire made by using our planishing hammer on the anvil and then twisted bangle. I'm going to make a bangle out of oval wire. Now I'm going to start with 3.5 millimeter diameter wire, and if you had a rolling mill you could just run it through the rolling mill, run it through the flat rollers on the rolling mill and make it oval. But even though I have a mill, I'm going to use a planishing hammer to make it oval. That way I'll have some characteristics from the hammer, which is quite nice, instead of just plain. So we'll use the slightly rounded end of the planishing hammer rather than the flat. If you use the flat, oftentimes you'll end up with marks from the edge of the hammer. So I'm just using my anvil, and like I said, the slightly rounded side of my planishing hammer. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try to get it the same height all the way along. So you can see that's pretty close. Take your time, go back over it if you need to. Now, I started with a 210 millimeter long piece of wire, and just by planishing it, not quite 3/4 of a millimeter. It's 1/2 millimeter in most of it, and 3/4 of a millimeter in the rest of it. It's gone to 230 millimeters long. So what I'm going to do now is anneal it, and then I'm going to put twist marks in a couple of spots. So I'm just going to heat the material. I've put it on my charcoal blocks. And I'm just going to use my easy torch for this. So we'll just heat it until it's a dull red. And I just start at one end. Turn off the light, and I just work my way down. And then we'll quench it in water and twist it. So I'm just going to mark it where I want to twist it from the 210 mark. So that's 210. Then we'll measure 50 millimeters from there. Cool. So that'll be 100 here and 100 on the end, so that's perfect. So I'm just going to use my GRS vise, and I'm going to clamp the wire right at the mark, and then use my parallel jaw pliers at 25 millimeters. And give it a full twist. then I'll do the same thing at the other end. And by using the parallel jaw pliers, you can just run the wire right down the throat. Okay. That's lovely. So now we'll just measure our length, make sure it's 210. So I'm going to cut and file this end, and then I'll measure it 210 millimeters. So I want a 67 millimeter diameter bangle, and this is 2.5 high, so 67 plus 2.5 times pi, 3.14, gives me 218.23 millimeters. 215. Cool. Okay, I've got the correct length. And even though I sawed the ends, I'm going to file them just to make sure they're perfectly flat. It should only take a couple of strokes to file. Swiss number 2 cut flat hand file. And I'm going to hallmark it now, just because I can. So I have the hammer marks facing me, and the hallmark will then be on the inside. And one of the reasons I do it now is that after I form this and solder it, I'll be sanding the solder joint. I can sand the mark opposite my hallmark at the same time. And my maker's mark. So now, because the only part that's work hardened is where we twisted it, we can just use our fingers to form it into an oval. So just keep working with your fingers. You can use your flat half-round pliers if you want. And we'll get this as perfect as we can get it, and then we'll solder it. So I just place this joint down on my soldering block, holding it in my third hand, and a little bit of pressure down just to make sure the joints don't move. Then I'll mix up my flux, flux the joint, and you don't need a huge amount of flux, just make sure that you have the joint covered. And I'm going to use a 3 millimeter long piece of hard solder. And a neutral flame. So I'll just use my solder pick to pick up my solder. So this is a tungsten pick. Heat it red, touch your solder, the solder will turn into a ball. So now I'm just going to brush the flame back and forth so that both sides of the metal are the same temperature. And when the flux goes clear, I'll lower my solder pick down. And touch the solder to the join. So there the flux is clear. And the solder stays in place. I'm only about 20 millimeters away, bouncing the flame off my charcoal block because it just helps get it hotter. So there the solder flowed, and I'm quite happy with that. So we'll quench it. Actually, I'm going to anneal the wire where it's twisted while I'm here. Because the rest of it is still annealed. That's lovely. So now we'll quench it, have a look at our solder join, and we can tell just by looking at the opposite side whether the solder has gone all the way through or not, and it has. I can see the meniscus, so I'm quite happy with that. So now I'll pickle it, and then we'll form it and sand it. Alright, we're out of the pickle, and we can tell by looking at the join that we've got a good solder join all the way around. So we just dry it off and round it up on the bracelet mandrel using our rawhide hammer. And now, because it's got a bit of a potato chip shape, we just put it on our wooden block. And by hitting it on the wooden block using the rawhide hammer, it's not going to put any marks in it. So now it's just a matter of tidying up our join, and then we'll polish it. So I'll just take my sanding stick with my 400 grade paper and tidy up the join. So I have the outside done. I'm going to use my split mandrel on my handpiece with 400 grade sandpaper. To do the inside. So when you're using this on the inside, be sure you keep it moving, otherwise you'll just wear grooves. Lovely. Now I'm going to take my planishing hammer and go over the area where it was soldered, because I would have sanded off the hammer marks. And we don't want to beat it up a lot, because every time we hit it, it'll make the bangle bigger. But we'll use the flat side of our hammer. Just to put a few marks in to match the rest of the bangle. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm just going to put it in the tumbler rather than polishing it on the wheel. So I've just put it in my rotary tumbler, and I'll give it about half an hour. All right, the tumbler's finished. So now I have to rinse this off, and then I'll give you a look at it. So here we are. Dry it off. Our oval wire twisted bangle. I'm quite happy with that.